Dinner was almost ready when my 10-year-old walked into the kitchen and asked casually, "Mom, can I have the blue gum Aunt Linda gave me?" I remember the stove still hissing, the smell of garlic in the air. Normal, ordinary. And then he added, "It makes the room spin." Something inside me went quiet. Kids don't describe gum like that. And in that small, offhand sentence, I felt the ground shift. What sounded harmless suddenly wasn't. I was standing over the stove, sliding a pan off direct heat, when Mason looked up at me and said it again, like it was nothing. "Mom, can I have the blue gum Aunt Linda gave me?" Blue gum. I asked him to repeat that. My voice sounded calm, but it didn't feel calm. He nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, the blue gum. It makes the room spin." That was the moment everything inside me tightened. A 10-year-old should not describe gum as something that makes the room spin. Kids say candy is sour, sweet, gross, too chewy. They don't describe sensory distortion. They don't casually mention dizziness like it's a flavor. I felt the heat from the stove on my arm, but it barely registered. My mind moved faster than my body. What kind of gum? When did he get it? How much did he have? Was this today? Yesterday? My thoughts were racing through possibilities, an allergic reaction, something mislabeled, something unregulated. Every scenario felt worse than the last. I crouched down in front of him and asked carefully, "Aunt Linda gave you that?" He nodded again. No uncertainty, no confusion, just matter of fact. And then he repeated it. "Yeah, it makes the room spin." He didn't look scared. That almost scared me more. He said it the way a child might describe a toy that lights up in the dark. Curious, slightly impressed. My chest tightened. I didn't waste another second trying to reason it out in the kitchen. I shouted down the hallway for someone to call 911. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded sharp, urgent, like it had already decided something was wrong before I consciously did. I grabbed Mason by the shoulders and asked him if he felt dizzy right now. He shrugged. A little. A little? I told him to stay with me. I asked him questions just to keep him talking. What did he eat today? Did he feel sick? Did his head hurt? Was he nauseous? I was trying to assess him, while also trying not to panic in front of him. The balance felt impossible. There's a strange clarity that comes when your child might be in danger. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels mechanical. You move, you act. You don't debate whether you're overreacting. You don't worry about looking foolish. You just protect. We got into the car because waiting felt unbearable. The drive to the emergency department felt longer than it should have. Traffic slowed near an intersection, and I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt. Every red light felt personal. Every delay felt offensive. Mason sat beside me, buckled in looking mostly normal. That almost made it worse. I kept glancing at him, searching for changes. Were his pupils different? Was his speech slower? Was he too quiet? I kept him talking. "Tell me about school today." He answered normally. That gave me a flicker of relief, but not enough to relax. Because what if symptoms were delayed? What if whatever he had taken hadn't fully hit yet? What if I waited too long? I thought about how easily something can enter a child's world. A colorful wrapper, a casual offer, a relative they trust. Children don't interrogate ingredients. They don't evaluate risk. That's our job. By the time we reached the emergency entrance, my heart felt like it had been running a marathon. I helped him out of the car, guided him inside, and announced what he had told me, that he had consumed something described as blue gum and that it made the room spin. Even saying it out loud made it sound surreal, but surreal doesn't mean safe. In those moments, nothing else mattered. Not whether I misunderstood, not whether it would turn out to be harmless, not whether anyone would accuse me of overreacting. All that mattered was that my child had described a physical sensation that didn't belong in his world, and I was not going to gamble with that. The nurse brought us through triage quickly, her tone calm in a way that almost steadied me by force. She asked for his name, his age, what he had taken, and when. I heard myself repeating the same strange phrase. He called it blue gum. Even saying it under fluorescent lights made it sound vague, almost foolish. But Mason had been clear. It made the room spin. She asked when he received it. I didn't know. She asked if he had experienced dizziness before. No. She asked what the packaging looked like. I paused there. I hadn't seen any packaging. I hadn't found a wrapper in his room or in the trash. I told her that. She raised an eyebrow slightly, not accusing, just registering the gap. Did it come from a wellness store? A pediatric clinic, she asked. I don't know, I said again, and I hated how that sounded. Like negligence, like distance. The attending doctor joined us soon after. He didn't rush. He spoke directly to Mason first, which I appreciated. He asked how long the spinning lasted, whether he felt nauseous, whether the gum made him feel more alert or different in any other way. When Mason described the sensation again, the doctor leaned in slightly and said he would document it as a neurological point of observation rather than a classification. The language shifted from everyday to clinical. He explained that certain unverified or unregulated consumables could cause sensory distortion in children. He didn't speculate about brands or motives. He focused on symptoms. The facility, he said, would treat what was present before attempting to identify the source. Stabilize first, label later. Mason went through a short neurological evaluation. He followed the doctor's finger with his eyes. He answered questions about school, slow, deliberate questions designed to check cognition. He squeezed the doctor's hands on command. He stood. He balanced. He responded appropriately for a child his age. The measurements were normal. Normal should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt conditional. The doctor warned me that normal results did not eliminate concern. Developing systems, he said, can respond unpredictably to substances that haven't been tested or regulated for pediatric use, especially if repeated, especially without supervision. He never accused me, not once. But his emphasis on adult responsibility settled under my ribs like something sharp. Adults must avoid introducing unregulated substances to children. The statement wasn't personal, but it landed personally. Then he asked the question that shifted the air in the room. Who gave him that? It was simple, neutral, necessary. Hospitals require accountability because ambiguity limits treatment. If Mason received something specific, they needed context. And if an adult provided it, that detail mattered. I hesitated. Mason had said Aunt Linda, clearly, without confusion. But what if he misremembered? What if it was another relative of friend's house? What if I named her now and I was wrong? Naming someone without certainty can fracture trust. But withholding information can sound like avoidance. I felt suspended between loyalty and responsibility. I told the doctor that Mason mentioned a relative. I said I needed time before identifying them. He didn't challenge me. He wrote a note into the chart without visible judgment. That somehow made the weight heavier. No argument, no pressure, just documentation. Mason remained under observation for a while. They monitored his pupils' hydration and general responsiveness. I watched every blink like it meant something. I replayed his words in my head. It makes the room spin. Eventually, when no further distortion presented and his vitals remained steady, we were discharged. They handed me a packet, neatly stapled precise. It warned against providing minors with supplements lacking regulatory approval. It encouraged reading labels carefully. It advised disposing of unidentified items rather than keeping them accessible. The final page instructed me to return immediately if Mason experienced renewed spinning fatigue, shortness of breath, or headaches. The instructions were clear. The cause was not. We walked out of the emergency department into the parking lot, and the air felt heavier than when we'd rushed in. Inside there had been structure questions, monitors, protocols. Outside there was uncertainty again. The staff had done their job. They stabilized. They documented. They warned. But none of them could answer the question that followed me to the car. Someone had handed my child something that altered his senses, and I still didn't know exactly who or exactly what. The next morning, I didn't call right away. I made breakfast. I watched Mason eat. I studied the way he moved through the kitchen looking for any trace of yesterday's dizziness. He seemed normal, steady, talkative, focused on his cereal. That steadiness gave me enough room to breathe, but not enough to forget. I waited until he was settled and I could step outside alone. I didn't want my voice to carry tension into his hearing. I didn't want him absorbing anything from the tone of this call. When I finally dialed Linda's number, I told myself to stay measured. No accusations. Just clarity. She answered with that familiar lift in her voice, the kind that always sounds like she's mid-laugh, even when she isn't. "Hey," she said, stretching the word like nothing in the world could possibly be urgent. I introduced myself evenly. I told her I needed to ask about something involving Mason. I chose my words carefully. I asked whether she had recently given him anything he might have referred to as gum. There was a pause, not long, but noticeable. Then she gave a small, almost amused exhale. "Oh my gosh," she said lightly. "He probably grabbed something silly off the kitchen counter. You know how kids are." I didn't react to that. I repeated Mason's exact phrasing. I told her he asked for the blue gum Aunt Linda gave me. I told her he said it makes the room spin. She laughed softly. He probably meant he was excited, she said, or dizzy from running around. Kids exaggerate everything. The ease in her tone unsettled me, more than defensiveness would have. There was no concern, no follow-up question about how he was feeling. No pause to consider the possibility that something tangible had happened. I tried again, steering the conversation back to specifics. "Have you brought any supplements, wellness samples, or unfamiliar candy around him recently?" I asked. "Anything labeled differently?" She didn't answer directly. "You really don't have to turn every little thing into a medical drama," she said, still in that buoyant register. "If you constantly analyze everything, you'll raise an anxious child." That line landed harder than I expected. I wasn't calling to debate parenting philosophy. I wasn't calling to defend my composure. I was calling because a hospital had documented a neurological symptom. but she reframed the entire situation as temperament mine. I reminded her that we had gone to the emergency department. I told her the staff wanted source information. She brushed past that too. I'm sure they overreact to everything she said. That's what hospitals do. There it was. Not denial, not admission, just deflection. Every time I asked about a product, anything labeled as a sample, anything part of a wellness initiative, she shifted into commentary about childhood imagination, about parents who hover, about how Mason liked her because she represented freedom. The implication was subtle but steady, that structure was rigid, that her approach was harmless, that my concern was the real excess. What she never did was answer the core question plainly. She didn't say, yes, I gave him this specific item. She didn't say no, I gave him nothing. She didn't ask, is he okay? And that absence began to speak louder than her words. Halfway through the call, I felt something change inside me. I stopped expecting clarity. I started observing. She wasn't trying to understand what happened. She was protecting an image of herself. Carefree, harmless, misunderstood. Any acknowledgement of specifics would require responsibility, so she avoided specifics entirely. I realized pressing further would only allow her to frame me as dramatic, so I thanked her for taking the call. I ended it without confrontation, without raised voices, without resolution. When I hung up, the silence felt different from the silence after the hospital. That silence wasn't confusion. It was understanding. If I wanted facts, I would not get them from Linda. After the call with Linda, I stopped trying to win a conversation. I started building a record. I took out a notebook that afternoon and rewrote the hospital discharge instructions in my own words. Monitor dizziness, watch for fatigue, track headaches, note hydration, check pupil response if anything seemed off. I dated the page. I wrote down exactly what Mason had said in the kitchen. It makes the room spin. There's something stabilizing about ink on paper. It moves you from emotion into structure. Over the next few days, I observed him the way the nurse suggested, looking for patterns instead of isolated moments. Was he slower to respond? Did he seem unusually irritable? Was his balance different when he walked down the hallway? I didn't interrogate him. I didn't dramatize it. I just watched. He completed his math worksheet without drifting. He held steady eye contact. He laughed at something ordinary on television. No renewed spinning. No visible decline. Still normal didn't answer origin. I called his pediatrician's office and explained that we had visited the emergency department for dizziness linked to an unidentified consumable. I asked that it be documented in his file. The nurse on the line reminded me that neurological concerns require patterns, not assumptions. She encouraged continued monitoring and advised me to restrict access to anything unfamiliar. That word restrict shifted my thinking. I walked through the house that evening with new eyes, pantry shelves, kitchen drawers, the small dish near the entry table where visitors sometimes set things down. I wasn't searching for a wrapper anymore. I was evaluating access. If something entered my son's system, it entered through someone. A few days later, I sat at the dining table with my laptop open. I told myself I was simply reviewing routine details, school calendar updates, utility bills, the usual tasks that create the rhythm of adulthood. But then I remembered something from the hospital instructions: monitor anything he might have consumed, and any behavioral shifts that could point toward physiological impact. Behavioral shifts include more than dizziness. I pulled up the balance history for Mason's savings account. It's a small account. Allowance deposits from chores, birthday gifts, nothing dramatic. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. I scrolled through the most recent entries half distracted until one line stopped me. A withdrawal. Not large, but not routine. The description read, "Health sample fee." I stared at it for a long moment, waiting for my brain to rearrange the words into something harmless. Mason does not have the authority to approve transactions. I have never enrolled him in any program that would authorize automatic withdrawals. There was no signature from me, no prior notice, no explanation. I clicked into the details. The transaction attempted to look legitimate, structured phrasing, neutral labeling, but it didn't align with anything in our household. It wasn't a school fee. It wasn't a subscription. It wasn't tied to a known vendor. It was labeled like participation, a health sample fee. The cold feeling that moved through me wasn't panic this time. It was clarity. The phrase from the kitchen blue gums suddenly had weight. The hospital's language about unregulated products shifted from abstract to concrete. And now there was something measurable. Money had left a minor's account. I enlarged the contact information tied to the transaction. The last name appeared immediately familiar. Carter. Bruce Carter, my cousin. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence settle. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This wasn't a child's phrasing or a relative's dismissive laugh. This was a financial record. Proof replaces argument. I dialed Bruce's number without raising my pulse. I didn't need volume. I needed confirmation. He answered after several rings. I introduced myself evenly and explained what I had found: a withdrawal from Mason's savings account labeled as a health sample fee. I told him I wanted clarification before involving the bank. There was a low laugh on the other end. "Oh, that," he said casually. "It's nothing serious. Nothing serious." He described it as support for a trial Linda was helping. Push through her professional network. He framed it as a small contribution, an opportunity, something that benefited family initiatives. I let him finish. Then I reminded him calmly that Mason is 10. He does not have legal authority to authorize financial participation in anything resembling a trial. I asked how funds could be withdrawn without custodial consent. Bruce didn't provide specifics. He shifted language toward enthusiasm, community, support. He suggested I was overthinking what he described as a harmless contribution. What he did not do was deny involvement. He did not ask about Mason's hospital visit. He did not ask about dizziness. He did not ask about spinning. The focus remained on preserving the narrative of opportunity. And that was the moment something aligned inside me. This was no longer about an aunt handing out something questionable out of poor judgment. There was structure here. Product, promotion, money. The withdrawal was small, but symbolic. It meant someone had treated my child not just as a recipient, but as a participant. When I ended the call, I didn't feel outraged. I felt anchored, because now I had something stronger than suspicion. I had a record. When Bruce picked up his voice, carried that easy confidence he always used when he assumed nothing serious was happening. I didn't circle around it. "I'm calling about a withdrawal from Mason's savings account," I said. "It's labeled as a health sample fee. I need clarification before I contact the bank." There was a short pause, then a low chuckle. "Oh, that he said like we were talking about a misplaced receipt. It's nothing dramatic." "Nothing dramatic." He explained it as if I should already understand. Linda was helping move a trial through her professional network. There were sample kits involved, a small contribution structure. He described it as support family backing family, an opportunity, something progressive. His tone suggested that I should feel proud. I let him finish without interrupting. Mason is 10, I said evenly. He cannot authorize financial participation in anything. How was money withdrawn from his account without parental consent? Bruce exhaled, not irritated exactly, but amused. You're making it bigger than it is, he said. It was a harmless contribution, just a way to show support for Linda's initiative. He kept using words like initiative, trial, contribution. He did not use words like consent. He did not use words like child. I repeated my question. Who authorized the transaction? He shifted, slightly, still avoiding specifics. He described a voluntary contribution framework. He implied that participation was informal, almost symbolic. He suggested that I was adding unnecessary stress by overanalyzing something designed to help a wellness project gain traction. Not once did he ask how Mason was feeling. Not once did he mention the emergency department. Not once did he acknowledge the phrase about the room spinning. The absence became louder than anything he said. I kept my voice steady. Minors cannot be used as financial channels for adult ventures, I said. The law requires custodial authorization for transactions tied to a child's account. That's not an emotional position, it's a legal one. Bruce's tone tightened just slightly. Not angry, defensive. You're acting like someone's exploiting him, he said. This was about family support. Family support. I sat with that phrase for a moment. Support does not require secrecy. Support does not bypass a parent. Support does not withdraw funds from a child's savings account. I didn't raise my volume. I didn't accuse. I simply repeated that Mason had no authority to approve financial participation in any trial sample program or business effort. Bruce tried one more time to wrap the situation in optimism. He spoke about entrepreneurial courage, about believing in new ideas before institutions catch up, about not discouraging innovation. But he still did not deny that the transaction was intentional. When I ended the call, something settled inside me. This wasn't an aunt casually handing out something without thinking. This wasn't careless generosity. There was a structure behind it. A product tied to promotion. Promotion tied to money. And my child had been placed somewhere inside that chain. Not by accident, by design. A week after the bank call, I walked into Mason's elementary school during the afternoon block, when parents are allowed to request meetings without disrupting instruction. The building felt ordinary: bulletin boards, distant classroom chatter, the quiet hum of routine. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so procedural could carry so much weight. I asked to meet with the school counselor, Porter Grant. Porter welcomed me into his office with a professional steadiness that didn't lean into sympathy or skepticism. He gestured toward a chair, opened a notebook, and said, "Tell me what happened." I didn't dramatize it. I repeated Mason's exact words. He said the blue gum Aunt Linda gave him makes the room spin. I explained the emergency department visit. I clarified that there had been a financial transaction connected to what appeared to be a sample program. Porter didn't interrupt. He didn't speculate about motives. He asked for phrasing, dates, observable reactions. He wanted the language as Mason used it, not my interpretation of it. That distinction mattered. He typed while I spoke, pausing only to confirm spelling and timelines. When I finished, he read part of it back to me to ensure accuracy. The statement about spinning, he explained, qualified as a wellness concern because it connected a consumable item to a physical symptom. Even if medical tests returned normal, the documentation of sensory distortion could not be dismissed as imagination. It becomes a record, he said calmly, and records create continuity. There was no alarm in his tone, no moral outrage, just structure. He explained that once a parent submits a verbal account involving a child's physical state, especially when tied to an outside product, the school has an obligation to log it formally. If certain thresholds are met, it can be elevated to a designated contact who handles product exposure or welfare concerns. He wasn't treating it like a family dispute. He was treating it like a compliance question. Within minutes, he placed a short call and arranged an intake conversation with the assigned caseworker Foster Hale. The name sounded clinical, distant. That distance felt reassuring. I met Foster later that week in a small administrative office that felt more municipal than emotional. He introduced himself without flourish and outlined the purpose of the intake: to determine whether a minor may have received an unregulated product for promotional trial or financial purposes without documented parental consent. Again, no accusation. Procedure. He asked for dates, exact wording, medical documentation, and the bank record I had printed. He clarified that the goal was not to prosecute family misunderstandings. The goal was to assess whether statutory lines had been crossed distribution without labeling financial involvement through a minor's account, absence of consent. As he spoke, the situation shifted in my mind from personal betrayal to regulatory review. Foster outlined potential next steps if the intake met investigative thresholds. There could be outreach, there could be requests for documentation from the adults involved. There could be a review of consent forms if any existed. He also outlined what might happen if the situation fell below mandate. The report would remain filed. The documentation would exist. It could be referenced later if patterns emerged. Then he said something that surprised me. "I recommend you refrain from direct confrontation for now," he said. "Ongoing contact can complicate memory clarity or create claims of influence." The advice wasn't about sparing feelings. It was about protecting the evidentiary chain. He explained the timeline clearly: 7 to 10 days for preliminary determination. During that period, they would compare the school documentation, the medical intake record, and Mason's brief statement. After that, I would receive either a request for further statements or notice that the matter had moved into formal inquiry. There was something grounding about having a deadline. No raised voices, no arguments across a kitchen table. Just a date on a calendar. When I left the building, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt relieved. Not because someone else would fight for me, but because the burden of persuading dismissive relatives had shifted toward people who relied on documentation instead of personality. For the first time since Mason said the room was spinning, the situation belonged to structure. And structure, unlike emotion, does not require agreement to function. The community center multipurpose room smelled faintly of brewed coffee and folding table vinyl. A printed banner reading, Natural wellness evening hung slightly crooked behind a long table lined with sample bottles and glossy pamphlets. About 20 people sat in metal chairs arranged in uneven rows. Some were curious, some were loyal friends. A few, like Heatherly, sat quietly with arms folded, listening. Linda stood at the front with the bright, animated tone she used when she wanted to command warmth. Bruce Carter hovered beside her near a small credit card reader and a clipboard of sign-up sheets. "These are plant-based," Linda began, holding up a small amber vial. "They support focus, balance, and energy. No harsh chemicals, completely natural." A woman in the second row raised her hand. "Are they FDA approved?" Linda smiled. "They're supplements, so they're not drugs. They don't require that level of regulation." Another voice followed immediately. "So, what certification do they have?" Bruce stepped forward. "They're part of a wellness trial. Independent testing." By whom, someone asked. There was a small pause. Linda adjusted the bottle in her hand. "Private labs." "Can we see documentation?" the same person pressed. "Ingredient lists, safety studies." Bruce cleared his throat. "We don't carry the full documentation to these events, but it's available through the company." "What company?" another voice asked. The questions were calm, not hostile, just specific. That specificity shifted the air in the room. Heatherly felt it, the subtle tightening when vague language meets precise inquiry. A man near the back leaned forward. "What's the recommended dosage?" "It depends on body weight," Linda replied. "For adults?" he asked. "For anyone, really," she said quickly. "It's gentle." "For minors," a woman clarified. Linda hesitated a fraction too long. "We encourage parental discretion." "So you've given this to children?" someone asked. "No. No parents choose." Linda said, her voice light but strained. "Is there written consent?" another person asked. "Especially if it's part of a trial." Bruce stepped in again. "It's not a clinical trial in the pharmaceutical sense. It's a wellness study." "Is there a consent form?" the woman repeated. Bruce glanced at Linda. "Participants agree verbally." A quiet ripple moved through the chairs. "Verbal consent for minors?" the man in back asked. "That's not standard." Linda shifted topics. "We've seen incredible testimonials. Improved clarity, calmer moods." "But do you have documentation?" the first woman repeated gently. The room went still. Linda's smile remained, but it no longer reached her eyes. Bruce adjusted the stack of pamphlets, flipping one over as if an answer might appear on the back. "What about adverse reactions?" someone else asked. "What happens if a child experiences dizziness, disorientation?" Heatherly did not move. She did not speak. But the word disorientations landed heavily in her chest. Linda clasped her hands. "We've had no confirmed issues." "Confirmed how?" came the reply. "Is there reporting follow-up?" Silence stretched longer this time. Bruce attempted to redirect. "Look, this is about supporting natural health and small business owners. Linda is working hard to bring something positive to the community." "Support is one thing," the man said evenly. "Transparency is another." A woman near the aisle looked down at the order sheet she'd been filling out. Slowly, she set the pen down. The absence of movement began to speak louder than the questions. No one reached for the sample cups. No one stood to purchase. A few attendees exchanged glances. Not accusatory, not dramatic, just measured. Heatherly observed the dynamic with a clarity she hadn't felt weeks earlier. There was no shouting, no public humiliation, just an accumulation of unmet answers. "Do you have ingredient breakdowns?" someone asked again. Linda's voice thinned. "Not on hand. And proof the funds collected are separate from the trial enrollment." Another question followed. Bruce's jaw tightened. "All funds support the initiative." "That doesn't answer the question," the man said quietly. The silence that followed was not angry. It was decisive. Chairs shifted. One person stood, thanked Linda politely, and walked toward the exit. Another followed. The energy that had initially been polite curiosity drained into stillness. Heatherly remained seated until nearly everyone else had left. She did not approach the table. She did not confront. She simply watched Linda gather the unsold bottles and Bruce unplug the card reader. There was no scene, no collapse. Just the weight of unanswered questions hanging in a room that had asked them clearly. As Heatherly stepped outside into the evening air, she did not feel triumph, only confirmation. Clarity did not require accusation. It required proof, and when proof could not be produced, silence spoke. The hearing room was smaller than Heatherly expected. Functional, fluorescent lit, and arranged for procedure rather than spectacle. A rectangular table faced a raised desk where the administrative officer sat with a binder open and a digital recorder positioned precisely at center. There were no dramatic flourishes, just files, timestamps, and structured order. Foster Hale sat to one side with a neatly tabbed report. Linda and Bruce occupied the opposite end of the table. Heatherly remained seated behind Foster hands, folded in her lap, not as an accuser, but as a parent, present for record accuracy. The officer began by outlining the scope review of community wellness product distribution, involving minors, associated financial transactions, and compliance with consent regulations. "This proceeding concerns regulatory adherence," the officer stated evenly. "It is not a criminal trial. It is an administrative review." Foster spoke first. His tone was measured, procedural. He summarized the documentation, Mason's reported symptoms, the pediatric follow-up, the absence of written consent for participation in any wellness trial, and the withdrawal from a minor's savings account labeled as a health sample fee. He referenced transaction records linking the charge to Bruce Carter and cross-referenced promotional materials describing the products as part of a trial initiative. "There is no documentation of parental authorization," Foster said. "There is no evidence of institutional review oversight. There are no adverse event reporting procedures on file. Funds were collected from a minor's account without documented legal guardian consent." He did not raise his voice. He did not speculate on intent. Linda shifted in her chair before responding. "We were trying to help people," she said. "These are natural supplements. Parents are free to make their own choices." This was blown out of proportion. The officer did not react to the emotional framing. "Ms. Linda, did you obtain written consent from the legal guardian prior to providing the product to a minor?" Linda hesitated. "Parents knew what we were offering." "That is not the question," the officer replied calmly. "Was written consent obtained?" "No," she admitted. Bruce leaned forward. The fee was minimal. It was a show of support for Linda's wellness study. No one was forced. The officer turned a page. "Mr. Carter." Do you acknowledge that the account charged belonged to a minor? Bruce paused. I wasn't aware of the account holder's age. The transaction record indicates the account designation, the officer said. Regardless, minors cannot authorize financial withdrawals independently. Bruce said nothing further. The officer continued, focused and precise. Supplements are not exempt from general consumer protection standards. When products are presented as part of a trial or a study, heightened consent and documentation are required, especially when minors are involved. Linda attempted again. We never claimed it was medical treatment. You described it as part of a structured initiative with participant fees, the officer replied. That language carries regulatory implications. The discussion remained technical. There were references to financial safeguarding statutes, minor protection provisions, and community distribution guidelines. No one discussed personal betrayal. No one spoke about family dynamics. The framework remained compliant. After reviewing the findings, the officers summarized the outcome. Effective immediately. Linda was prohibited from distributing wellness products to minors without documented parental consent, reviewed by an independent authority. She was restricted from unsupervised contact with minors in contexts involving product promotion or sample distribution. Bruce was barred from initiating or processing financial transactions involving minors' accounts without verified guardian authorization. Both were required to provide restitution for the improperly collected fee and complete compliance education regarding consumer protections. These measures are preventive, the officers stated. They are designed to safeguard minors and ensure regulatory adherence. There was no condemnation in the voice-only structure. Linda's shoulders tightened. Bruce's jaw remained set. Neither argued further. When the recorder was switched off, the room felt smaller, quieter. Heatherly did not look at Linda. She did not need to. The outcome had not come from anger or confrontation. It had come from documentation timelines and procedure. As she stepped out into the corridor, the air felt steady. Not lighter, just settled. There was no surge of victory, only the quiet recognition that boundaries had been formally drawn. The months that followed did not announce themselves with milestones. There was no single day that marked a return to normal. Instead, stability arrived in small, ordinary increments. Mason adjusted, first in ways that were almost invisible. The dizziness never returned. His pediatric check-ins became routine rather than reactive. The word spinning gradually disappeared from conversation, replaced by math homework, soccer practice, complaints and questions about science projects. But something quieter had changed in him. One afternoon at school, a classmate passed around chewable vitamins from a bright bottle, insisting they helped with focus before tests. Mason looked at the label, then shook his head. My mom says I don't take anything unless she checks it, he said simply. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't fear, it was discernment. Later, when he told Heatherly about it, he didn't frame it as a victory. He just said, I didn't know what was in it. That was enough. He began asking more questions in general about ingredients on cereal boxes, about why some products said natural but still had warnings about how banks know who can use an account. Curiosity replaced confusion. He wasn't anxious. He was attentive. Heatherly noticed the shift and resisted the urge to over-explain. Instead, she answered, calmly, factually. If you don't understand what something is, you wait, you ask, you check. Trust, she realized, could be taught the same way. Linda and Bruce did not reach out. There were no apologies, no clarifications, no attempts to revisit the hearing's outcome. Their silence might once have felt heavy, like a fractures in the family structure. Now it felt different. Silence became boundary. Without calls or invitations to navigate, there was no fresh tension to manage. No rehearsed conversations in the kitchen. No emotional negotiations about intention versus impact. The absence of contact created a clean edge around Mason's world. Heatherly stopped scanning for updates. She stopped waiting for explanation. Documentation had done what argument never could. It clarified roles. Family, she began to understand, was not defined by shared history alone. It was defined by reliability. Reliability looked like teachers who documented concerns without hesitation. It looked like a counselor who escalated appropriately. It looked like a caseworker who explained timelines instead of offering comfort. It looked like a pediatrician who wrote instructions clearly and followed up. It also looked like a child who said no when something felt uncertain. Bloodline had once been her default definition of loyalty. Now she measured closeness differently. Who safeguards? Who answers directly? Who respects consent without being reminded? The house felt calmer in that clarity. Not because everything had been repaired, but because expectations had been reset. One evening, Mason asked, "Are we okay?" Heatherly paused before answering. She did not speak about hearings or restrictions or accounts. She said, "We're steady." And that was true. Steady meant he knew to ask before accepting something unfamiliar. It meant money in his account required permission. It meant adults were accountable to process, not personality. Outside, the seasons shifted quietly. Inside, so did they. There was no final confrontation, no dramatic reconciliation. Just a mother and son moving forward with clearer definitions of trust, earned, documented, and practiced. So, here's the question that lingers. What would you do if someone in your own family put your child's safety at risk, intentionally or not? Would you stay quiet to keep the peace or step forward to protect what matters most? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments if you feel comfortable. And if this story resonated, consider supporting the channel. Accountability isn't loud, but it is strong.